The F-100 was one of the first supersonic jets ever added to War Thunder. Let's check it out. In the early 1950s, North American Aviation proposed an updated version of the F-86 Sabre with a new 45-degree wing sweep and a more powerful engine. The U.S. Air Force was interested, but proposed quite a large number of changes. Eventually, the design became an entirely new aircraft, with almost nothing in common with the original F-86, and it was named the F-100, but retained the name Super Sabre. The prototype first flew in early 1953 and actually went supersonic on its first flight, but early testing demonstrated an enormous number of problems with the plane, which would prove to be a sign of things to come. The F-100A entered service in late 1954, but immediately started suffering accidents due to all kinds of mechanical problems and design flaws, with constant upgrades creating new problems for every old issue that was solved. The Air Force planned to phase out the F-100 after only 4 years, which was an incredibly short lifespan for an American jet fighter. However, rising Cold War tensions in the early 1960s forced a reactivation of the F-100 fleet, and they ended up serving throughout the rest of the decade. The F-100 also served in the Vietnam War in a variety of roles, initially being used as a conventional fighter, but eventually it was shifted to close air support. The F-100 proved to be incredibly unpopular with ground crews, as it was a very maintenance-heavy jet, and throughout regular use in the Vietnam War, it was still suffering from near-constant mechanical problems and even more design flaws being discovered. Several upgraded models were introduced that resolved some of the issues, but often introduced new problems of their own, with about 1/3 of all F-100s ever produced being lost due to accidents. The F-100D was the most significant upgrade version, with new systems for ground attack, along with some aerodynamic improvements. Despite all of its problems, the F-100 eventually flew for both the United States and a bunch of export customers, and it soldiered on into the 1970s. What we get in War Thunder are 3 versions of the F-100, the D model in the US and French trees, and the A model in the Chinese tree. All of them are at battle rating 9.3, and they're all very similar, so I'm going over all 3 of them here. The D model gets a ballistics computer with the CCRP for its bombs, however the A model doesn't get anything. All 3 of them get the AN/APG-30 radar rangefinder, as well as a radar warning receiver. The AN/APG-30 is a fairly standard radar rangefinder that doesn't really have any advanced features, and honestly, it's not going to be much use outside of simulator battles. The loadouts of all 3 jets are one of the biggest differences. The A model only has 2 pylons, while the French D model has more limited weapon options. The air-to-air missiles you get are the AIM-9B and AIM-9E. The B is a very basic rear aspect missile, with entry-level performance and a caged seeker. It's all you get in the French D, but generally this isn't a very good weapon. The American and Chinese models can upgrade to the AIM-9E. I'm not a big fan of the 9E, while it is an upgrade over the 9B, and it has an uncaged seeker. It still only has 10 Gs of pull, and it's not very good against maneuvering targets. The Chinese and American versions also get the AGM-12B Bullpup. This is a manual command line-of-sight guided air-to-ground missile with a punchy high-explosive warhead that can take out pretty much anything in its BR range on a direct hit. I personally find these incredibly difficult to use, but you might be better with them than I am. The flight performance of the F-100 has a lot of quirks, and it can take a while to get used to this jet's handling. First, despite having an afterburner and being marginally transonic, this is simply not a fast jet. You can push a little past Mach 1 with some altitude, but the acceleration is pretty bad, and the controls lock up hard at transonic speeds. In a down tier, Its speed will still be enough to provide an advantage, but at tier or in an up tier, a large number of jets are going to be able to outrun you and out-accelerate you. In terms of maneuverability, the news isn't great. The F-100 can do okay if you keep it above 700 kilometers an hour but below Mach 1, but the energy retention is awful, and there's a lot of weight in this plane. So you're going to get 2 or 3 good energy turns at most before you turn into an oil tanker with wings at lower speeds. Now, the leading edge slats on the D model can help a bit at medium speeds, but generally speaking, the F-100 tends to get outperformed in traditional twisting dogfights most of the time. While its turn rate in the optimal speed range is decent, it bleeds off energy too quickly and accelerates too slowly, so if you can't line up a kill shot in the first couple of turns, it's usually not going to end well for the F-100. Also noteworthy is just how poorly this jet does in vertical maneuvers. Its rate of climb in level flight is pretty average, but even with the afterburner, the jet is still really heavy, and it just struggles bad in like vertical scissors, or even just those dumb loop rate fights that some players seem to love so much. The last caveat is that the Chinese A model doesn't get flaps of any kind, but the D models can deploy combat flaps safely up to around 600 kilometers an hour, but honestly I don't suggest it, as the additional energy bleed is just too expensive. All three do get a good air brake though. When you take the F-100 into air battles, you actually get a fair amount of flexibility for how you want to fly it. You've got the weapon loadouts to focus on air combat, do ground pounding, or go multi-role. If you're doing air combat, you're in a BR range where going for high altitude stuff isn't usually as risky, and you don't have to worry about semi-active radar missiles all over the place, so it's totally an option. And this jet actually does really well with boom and zoom attacks if you get into a down tier, and overall, its set of cannons ends up being a lot more effective than you might think. It gets a set of M39A1 20mm, which are a lot easier to aim than some of the other American guns around this BR range. Just keep an eye on your ammo count. You'll also want to remember that the overall flight performance of the F-100 isn't quite as good as at least half of the jets it goes up against, so your air combat maneuvering is going to need to be seriously on point if you want to be competitive, and you're going to need to keep your head on a swivel to watch out for missiles, since you don't get any flares. For ground attack, the D model gets the CCRP, and it can do respectable base damage with a load full of bombs, or any of the three can load up on rocket pods and go out for pillboxes and stuff. Taking this plane out into close air support actually ends up being better than you might expect. If you're good with the bullpups, and I'm certainly not, it'll probably be one of your top performers in this BR bracket. Generally though, you can take a mixed weapon load of Sidewinders and rocket pods and dumb bombs, which give these jets pretty respectable multi-role potential. Just remember that it turns like crap at low speeds when you're dodging around over a battlefield, and it doesn't get flares for when you run into SAMs. Visually, if I'm being honest, I've never liked the look of the F-100. Its fuselage is a weird shape, the nose looks like an anteater, and the tail is just tapered in a strange way. That said though, a few of them do have some good-looking paint jobs available, so that's something at least. The visual detail is really good, even if it's a weird-shaped plane. Landing the F-100 isn't too difficult, but it's still a heavy jet, so you have to keep that in mind and avoid stalling out at low speeds. The Chinese A model doesn't get landing flaps, but the Ds can drop them at about 400 kilometers an hour. The D also gets a drag chute, which helps quite a bit. The cockpit of the F-100 is actually pretty decent. The instrument panel is easy to navigate, the visibility is good in all directions, and the guns are actually really simple to aim in VR from the internal view. Overall, great cockpit. To close out on 3 models of the F-100. These jets get a radar warning receiver at a comparatively low BR. They have excellent cannons and carry strong air-to-ground weapons. However, they're very heavy and maneuver horribly at low speeds. They don't get any countermeasures, and their energy retention is garbage. The final verdict on the Super Sabre is that this is a fairly balanced multi-role aircraft that can reasonably perform air combat or ground attack, but it can still be outclassed in both jobs by more dedicated single-role jets in its BR range. If you like a little bit more of a varied playstyle and you can live with its limitations, the F-100 will probably serve you well. As always, thanks for watching.